Education experts are alarmed at the latest national snapshot of achievement. A report released today by the Council of Australian Governments, or COAG, says the gap between disadvantaged students in some rural areas and those in better off communities in the cities continues to widen. Croke, the head of the Catholic Education Commission in New South Wales, says the issue is the country's biggest educational challenge because of the regional disparities. Suzanne reports.
The report includes data gathered from the NAPLAN tests in Year 3, 5, 7 and 9. Chairman of the COAG Reform Council, McClintock, says the results are alarming, particularly for Western Australia and Queensland. Indigenous results have not improved in Year 8 and 9 in any state or territory, and school attendance is a real concern.
Attendance figures, and particularly in high school, have actually got worse over the 2 years we've reported on, and I think clearly children that are not attending school are going to have not only bad education outcomes, but it will flow into health and employment as well.
McClintock says the results mean the federal government is unlikely to meet its closing the gap targets.
Well, I think it's urgent. I don't think that any of the targets for halving the gap or closing the gap that we report on later in the year when we have our Indigenous report, I don't think any of those are realistic if we can't maintain and improve attendance rates at school.
Federal Minister for Education Peter Garrett acknowledges more effort is needed.
Especially for our Aboriginal students, there will need to be additional focus and additional effort. We need to learn what works well. I think we're pretty clear about what we need to do in terms of attendance. It's a priority for mine and for Minister Macklin's, and we've identified that as something which we will specifically work with the NT government on. But it also needs the school communities, and frankly it needs the parents too, to send a very strong message to their kids that they need to be at school.
But Executive Director of the Catholic Education Commission, Croke, says the results show a very disturbing trend for the whole country.
That's one of our biggest problems as a nation, the growing gap between city and country in terms of student outcomes.
He says the decline in performance from rural students is bringing down Australia's international ranking.
This is a very serious issue, but there doesn't seem to be much interest in responding to it. I mean, if this was the Australian Olympic swimming team that was doing slower times now than it was during the Sydney Olympics, and that the most able swimmers of all were fallen furthest behind, we'd have a national crisis.
Other findings contained in the report show that in 2000, 18% of Australian Year 9 students were performing in the top bands in international tests, but in 2009 that dropped to 13%.
In relative terms, Australia is not performing as well as a number of other countries. We've been passed by a number of countries, and I think that if you are looking at productivity and where Australia's going, we can't really afford to lose our position having the number of students in those top areas.
What we are going to do about it, what we are doing about it, I think is one of our understated educational challenges. If I had to nominate one major challenge in Australian education, I think that would be it, to try and narrow the gap in performance between city and country.
It's unfair to say that there's no national plan. We're providing huge effort into these areas, but we're picking up on decades of underinvestment and under-attention sometimes too by the authorities, and it's going to take us a while to continue to lift the effort in those places.
On the positive side, the average scores for Year 3 and Year 7 reading and Year 5 numeracy have improved across the country between 2008 and 2011. And more students are staying at school to complete Year 12. Suzanne Smith, Lateline.